All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this lecture. I'm calling the Cold War, the international scene. We're going to look at the decades roughly from the 1950s through the 1960s. Okay, and this will be followed up by a more specific diving into the Vietnam War, which was one of our biggest conflicts during the Cold War era. So the Vietnam War will be the next lecture I record. So after the United States unleashed its two destructive atomic bombs on Japan, as we saw in our last lecture, a previous lecture on the Cold War and the home front, you know that pretty soon after, Russia or the USSR had its own atomic bomb. Now the world had not one, but two nuclear powers, and many in the world, not only in the US and Russia, feared what they called mutually assured destruction. So it was a fearful time in the world, and we talked about how that manifested in cultural ways in the United States last time. So on the international scene, what came to pass is what came to be called the two superpowers, the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, right? This big, huge area encompassing what was much of the Russian Empire, right? And they changed their name after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. So what these reddish and pinkish areas, by no means were China and Russia really allies, but they are just red and pink are signifying they called themselves communist nations. And they wanted to expand their sphere of influence in the face of the United States and their Western European allies' sphere of influence. So if you see the bluish areas, those are areas that are going to be either wholeheartedly or nominally allied with the United States and Western Europe. And then the pinkish areas are places that are kind of or maybe fully allied with the Soviet Union and or China. Okay. The end of the Cold War also brought the end to many colonial empires, right? After World War II, many brand new countries here in Africa and in Southern Asia, right in here, enjoyed their independence from colonial powers for the first time in a long time. So the reason why we call it the Cold War is because the United States and the Soviet Union never actually launched nuclear missiles at each other. However, the Cold War was not cold in many, many spots, right? In Turkey, in Greece, in Iran, in Egypt, in Vietnam, in Bolivia, and Chile, and elsewhere, the Cold War heated up, and whether you had the United States supporting one side or the Soviet Union supporting the other side, right? There was many millions of lives lost and many wars fought in the name of the United States and the Soviet Union expanding their spheres of influence. Well, let's back up and just look at Germany real quick. After World War II, the USSR was allied with the United States and allies in defeating Nazi Germany. And part of the spoils of war, the USSR demanded that it control part of East Germany so Germany couldn't invade it again. Remember, during World War I and World War II, Germany invaded into USSR, and USSR did not want to have that happen ever again. So the Allies, which are largely made up of the US, Great Britain, and France, versus the USSR, right, came to a compromise and split up Germany between West Germany and East Germany. And within that, and within East Germany, the capital is Berlin. Berlin was further divided into East Berlin, right, which was controlled by the Soviet Union, and West Berlin, which was controlled by the various allies, right, United States, Great Britain, and France. So it's really interesting that within Berlin, the western part of it, these folks who were allied with the West were literally hemmed in and surrounded by the Soviet army.
I always assumed that because I've heard of the Berlin Wall, obviously. I always assumed that it must have been like in the middle of Germany and that was like the border city.
No, no, it was within the confines of East Germany. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It is. More on building the wall in a couple slides, but please, Joey, stop me if you have further questions.
I will.
So what's more, let's focus on the orange part. This is the pro-Soviet Union Warsaw Pact. And it's not like these countries voted and said, hey, yo, we want the Soviet troops and tanks in our country and we want them here. No way. This was a complete power move by the Soviet Union. Sure, there were some sympathizers within East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, but it was not a democratic choice for what came to be called as Eastern Europe to be part of the Warsaw Pact.
Hmm.
So they were allied with Russia. And this is basically the European theater of the division between, right, the East allied with Communist Soviet Union and the West allied with Democratic West. And I use both those terms in air quotes, Soviet Union being communist and the West being democratic, because it just depends on where in the West and where in the East and how you define those terms.
I'm noticing. I'm looking at this map. Yugoslavia is like orange on it.
Yeah,
I was under the impression that Yugoslavia was like also a communist nation.
it was a communist nation, but they weren't part of the Warsaw Pact. And Tito, the longtime dictator, communist head of Yugoslavia, was kind of independent in the sense that they weren't part of the Warsaw Pact. And he did a lot of things to basically upset the Soviet Union, yet they weren't allied with the West either.
Okay.
I would push them more in the alliance with the Soviet Union for sure, but there was a big sense of independence here.
Gotcha.
Good question. Okay. In 1946, right, this is just very shortly after World War II ended, Winston Churchill came to Missouri, came to the United States, very much wanted to speak to the American people. Winston Churchill was the prime minister who helped lead England through the victory in World War II. And Winston Churchill famously warned that the USSR's expansion into Eastern Europe right here, he said famously, from Stettin in the Baltic, from way in the north, to Trieste in the Adriatic, way in the south, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. And he's referring to from north to south, Europe is basically divided in two. And he was warning that we need to do something about that. We, meaning the United States, England, and its Western allies. So in response, the Soviet Union, I'm going to call them various things, and I'm sorry, variously called the USSR or the Soviet Union, same big empire.
What did USSR stand for? Sorry, that's like such a detail. It probably doesn't matter, but
Oh, it's okay. The Union of Socialist Soviet Republics.
okay. Gotcha.
Yep. So in response to this ratcheting up of political rhetoric by Winston Churchill and others, the USSR cut off Allied occupied West Berlin. Right? In other words, West Berlin was cut off by the Soviet Union. They couldn't get any food in, food out. They couldn't travel in, travel out. They basically were doing a big time power move to the 2 million or so people who live there. So in response, the United States for a year airlifted food into West Berlin. And this just brought a lot of just positivity and just like, yay, America rocks. You know, screw you, Soviet Union, United States is helping us West Berliners and keeping us fed. So this was a very good humanitarian and PR move by the United States. What's more, during World War II, the United States, especially the United States, said that we are fighting World War II in the name of freedom, against colonization, against fascism, against, you know, the Holocaust and the killings of colonized peoples. And this came at a time when during World War II, still many areas especially in equatorial Africa and India and Southern Asia, were still colonial possessions of European nations, of Japan, and Cuba and Puerto Rico were still colonies of the United States
Mhm.
for the time being. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just nodding along. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. So many colonized peoples, especially in Africa and Southern Asia, took to heart what the United States was preaching about freedom and independence, and even the Soviet Union based a lot of their rhetoric on being anti-imperialist, being anti-colonial, right? So there was a backlash, at least rhetorically, on the colonization that took place from like the 1850s to World War I and II. So many of these nations basically cut and paste, fought for their independence from either France, England, Belgium, and other places, and cut and paste part of the Declaration of Independence and declared their own independence. However, these brand new vulnerable nations also were coming into their own in the face of these big superpowers, the US and the USSR, wanting to expand their influence
This
globally.
is where the term third world comes from, right? Because it
Yeah,
was like at
exactly.
this point it was capitalism is the first world, communism is the second world, and then everywhere that's like quote unquote up for grabs is the third world.
Yeah, and this is a very US centric terminology, right? We're number one, the Soviet Union number two, and the third world number three.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
exactly right. So these quote unquote third world countries, or another way to put it, another Cold War terminology was these are developing countries. Okay.
I thought that that was a more modern term. I assumed that that was a more modern term because it sounds like a language that would have been switched to be more politically correct. It's not as dismissive as third world, so I assumed it was a more modern term.
Well, there's a lot of overlap. They were called third world developing countries. I mean, it's kind of synonymous.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
So all these countries here, I don't know if you see the dates, they range from the late 50s through the 1960s. The point is, after World War II, many of these former colonized nations won their independence politically, militarily, and rhetorically, because Western European countries could no longer pretend they are going to be for freedom and democracy if they had a colony like Britain had in the Sudan, for example. All right. So at the same time, the US and the Soviet Union are trying to expand their quote unquote spheres of influence where they have political alliances. Okay. So one of the main ways in which they did it, they meaning the Soviet Union and the United States, very similar Cold War foreign policies, was they would offer bread or lead. In other words, if you ally with us, say, let's take the example of Ghana, which we will look at in a second. Ghana right here. If you ally with us, we will offer you aid. We will recognize you as a country, and diplomatically, comes with a lot of trade benefits, and we'll help you develop as a country. If you don't ally with the United States, or even worse, if you ally with the USSR, we will get involved militarily. This is why at the same time that, for example, the US AID program came out, or various other international development programs came out, the Green Berets were invented. We'll look more at the invention of the Green Berets when we talk about Vietnam and the Kennedy administration later.
So
And
am I
go ahead.
totally incorrect in thinking that this sphere of influence is functionally more or less the same thing as an empire? I mean, there's slight differences, but I feel like from a moral level, it's basically the same thing.
Kind of, but the US, American people frowned upon sending thousands of US soldiers into foreign lands after World War II. Of course, this
But they
wasn't.
are threatening it. That's what the lead is, I thought it.
Yeah. But the United States and the Soviet Union tried to do it through proxy wars, meaning we're going to give your internal people money who are against you, and so money and arms. But that fell apart during the Korean War. That's when one of our major push of soldiers into Korea, I'll talk about in a second over here. the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Then the US did end up sending soldiers to fight these Cold Wars abroad. Let me give you an example where we didn't. So this, I'm going to give you the example of the Greek Civil War down here. Greece is a former outpost of the Ottoman Empire, right? And the Austro-Hungarian Empire after that. And during World War II, Greece was occupied by the Nazis, right, by Germany. And the army within Greece, the nationalist Greek army, were called the Greek People's Liberation Army, ELAS for short. So the Greek People's Liberation Army successfully ousted the Germans from Greece. Okay. And here's a celebration in Athens, Greece, celebrating, yay, no more Germans in Greece. We got rid of the Nazis. After World War II, many in the ELAS party wanted democratic reforms for Greece, and they wanted its monarchy ousted, right? At the time, Greece was being run by a king.
Mm-hmm.
This actually led to the first proxy war. And again, a proxy war is a war where, for example, the United States doesn't send troops, but we send supplies and help, right? Money and lead.
Yeah.
And this led to the Greek Civil War from 1944 to 1949. And what the US claimed, right, and there's a grain of truth in this, is that the ELAS was pro-communist. Well, that's not necessarily true. The ELAS was primarily a nationalist organization, which meant that they wanted Greece to be sovereign, right, to govern itself. But included within this very complicated group of political groups were some communists. There were some Republicans, but there were also some communists. So the US was worried that they would become pro-Soviet, or at least lean that way, or perhaps even be too independent and nationalistic. So the US Cold Warriors became worried about the Soviet Union expanding influence into Greece, because look how close Greece was to the Iron Curtain. Bulgaria was part of the Warsaw Pact. Greece is right next door. So how do we deal with Greece, given after the World War II, many in the United States say, you know what, we should not be all international anymore. We should be isolationist, right? Let's bring our troops home. Let's focus on rebuilding the United States, right? We're done messing with things in Europe. However, foreign relations leader Vandenberg, there's that big Vandenberg Air Force Base down in the middle of California named after this guy. Vandenberg told President Truman at the time, he said, you know what you have to do to the American people? Make a personal appearance before Congress and scare the hell out of the American people. Scare them into thinking communists are going to infiltrate your neighborhoods and ruin our American way of life. So strike fear in the heart of Americans so they will support this ratcheted up military and other ways of stopping the Soviet Union.
This is the Red Scare, essentially. That's what that was.
Yeah, the Red Scare, right? Scared of the Reds. So Truman did exactly that in 1947. He issued what's called the Doctrine of Containment. And the idea was, and you're going to read about this in your book, was to contain the Soviet Union within their existing boundaries, not allow them to spread their influence, say, into Greece down here, or later on into Turkey, right, and elsewhere. So there's a policy of containment, which you are going to be reading about. So Congress agreed. And remember, Congress controls the money. So Congress sent $400 million to support the Greek monarchy, right? Not a Greek democracy, but monarchy against the so-called communists, the ELAS. And it was a bloody war, and I apologize for this image, but I just wanted to get across the fact that this was not a Cold War everywhere, right? These are soldiers of the Greek monarchy supported by the US with the heads of slain ELAS soldiers, who they're calling communists. So, and this was a win. The Greek monarchy succeeded. The ELAS were destroyed for the most part. And
when did Greece win its independence? Because it's not a monarchy anymore.
No, it didn't. Later on. It
Okay.
took later on, a few more decades. Good point. Not to let the Soviet Union off the hook whatsoever, Hungary, let me just show you on a map where Hungary is. Hungary. Hungary right here, this very multicultural and multi-ethnic capital of Budapest, Hungary right here, right? This is the crossroads of Soviet Union, right? Asia Minor, Western Europe right here in Budapest, very diverse, cool place Budapest is. There was a move towards independence. Many Hungarians said, you know what, we want Russia to get out of here. So in 1956, there was a big move by Hungarians to demand Russians leave. The Soviet Union said, heck no, and the tanks rolled into downtown Budapest, violently crushing the revolt. Right, I was fortunate enough to go visit Budapest a couple years ago, and right in the central part of the city, still today, there's places where locals will show you there's still bullet holes in the buildings, right, from the Soviet Union crushing this 1956 attempt at independence. Japan, whoop. Bread or lead in Japan. As you know, the United States was victorious in the Pacific front of World War II, right? Defeated this expanding empire of Japan. And what did Japan choose after World War II? Well, Japan chose bread, right? And since then, Japan has been one of our closest allies in Asia and the world. And along with that bread came a massive influx of investment from the United States to Japan to rebuild it. So from 1945 to 1952, basically General MacArthur was in charge of, he headed the rebuilding of Japan. And how did we do that along with Japanese do that? Well, Japan disbanded its military. That's going to allow a lot more money to be funneled into other developmental policies. There were democratic political reforms in Japan, right? So the Japanese democracy was born. Labor unions were recognized, right? The federal government recognized labor unions just like in the United States. There was huge investment in industrialization. And this led to the Japanese economic boom, and we still have Suzuki, Toyota, and Nissan as the result of that, right? Japan is like the third or fourth largest industrial nation still today. And what's more, they sold the largest landowners' unused land to landless people. In other words, wealthy landowners, the land they weren't using got sold to folks who needed land to grow agriculture. The result of this was in Japan was rapid industrial agriculture and political improvements, right? And the booming of the Japanese economy for much of the 20th century. So, bread or lead to Europe? You might have heard of the Marshall Plan. In 1948, Senator Marshall issued a plan in which he said, you know what, how we keep Europe stable, how we revitalize them, and how, and most importantly, make them our political allies for decades to come, was to offer, right, an investment plan for Western Europe, right? And this is the little propaganda poster showing how, boom, Europe's going to hold together, right, against the Soviet Union. So the Marshall Plan also came with strings attached, of course. The United States wasn't just going to pour a bunch of money into some nation and not, right, make the nation accountable like we have with Afghanistan. Oh my gosh, the amount of money we've poured into Afghanistan in the last 15 years and just don't know where the money went is criminal. However, with the Marshall Plan, it was allocated with the deal that you better open your books. If we're going to invest in you, we need to know where the money's being invested so it's not skimmed off the top and it goes towards real infrastructure investment. And it did. So 12.5 billion US tax dollars went into rebuilding Western Europe.
It's so funny to me that I thought this when you talked about us investing in Japan, and I'm thinking it again with Western Europe, that it's American money being spent to build all this infrastructure. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe this is a more recent thing. It doesn't have anything to do with this. But both Europe and Japan have way better infrastructure than we have in America. Like, their public transit in both those countries is amazing, and we have really, like, our trains in America, Amtrak is shit compared to the rest of the world. So
Yeah,
it's funny that our money has gone to.
Yeah, I like your use of that German word, Scheiß. Yep, it is.
Oh,
It's all right. So if you look at Europe's infrastructure, their train system, oh my gosh, their healthcare system, all kinds of stuff, in part because of the Marshall Plan investment, in part because they didn't spend huge amounts of money on the military, because the United States military was promised to protect them from the Soviet Union. And you're absolutely right, right? This led to the modernization of Western Europe and Japan. You're exactly right. So many people today are saying that we need a Marshall Plan for the United States, right? To get our infrastructure, our transportation systems, right? Our healthcare systems modernized, right? Because remember Europe, I mean, Europe leveled itself. They took all those fancy munitions and shot each other up and blew each other up. That was Liverpool before. Here's Dresden in Germany. And it was rebuilt. The Marshall Plan was very successful and popular with Europeans. Oh my gosh, why wouldn't it be? Not many people in the United States were opposed to the plan because they said, wait a minute, what are we doing spending my hard-earned money in Europe? Well, it's an arguable point. However, who for the 50, 60, or 70 odd years that this alliance between Europe, Western Europe and the United States has stuck together, and they've been our closest allies, right? These folks with the biggest stacks of money, United Kingdom, France, Italy, Greece, right? We'll have to see if that alliance stays in the next decade or so. I mean, history continues to unfold. Let's go back to Europe. What did USSR do in response to the Marshall Plan success? Because what this is causing many people in Eastern Europe to do, many people in Eastern Europe are saying, oh, heck no, we're going to go to Western Europe. Let me get the map up. Because there's all this development in Eastern Europe, right? So Western Europe is developing in part because of the Marshall Plan. Many people in Eastern Europe are saying, heck with this living under this communist regime. We're gonna go live over here. And the communist regime in East Berlin said, nope, we don't want to lose all our best and brightest. So that's when the wall was built, right? The Berlin Wall is built literally to keep Westerners out of the East. Here's East Berlin over here, and here are West Berliners looking at them.
Were there similar barricades on other borders? Like that's in Berlin, but what about the rest of the Iron Curtain?
Yeah, I don't think so. I just know there were strong border patrols. I don't think there was literal walls anywhere else. It was just too vast, much too vast an area.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but my guess is no.
Okay. There was just like strong police to prevent people from.
Oh yeah, border patrol, checkpoints, etc.
Yeah.
But that didn't prevent many Europeans from running away or fleeing as refugees to the West. Oh, heck no. All right, let's move to the war we fought with China. Do you know, Joey, did you know we fought a war with China?
In the 1950s?
Yeah.
That sounds familiar. I mean, I assume it was related to the Korean War. I know that was in this time.
Yeah, it was called the Korean War, right? And
okay.
China and North Korea. So during World War II, this might blow your head a bit, China, the USSR, and the US allied against Japan, right? Japan was the big expansive empire at the time. And then during World War II, Chinese folks, Soviets, and the US fought against Japan, defeated it. After the war, Mao Zedong and other nationalists unified China around this notion of communism. So now in 1949, China turns communist, much to the chagrin of the United States. So just as the Soviet Union sought its sphere of influence, right? China was seeking its sphere of influence, and Korea is right there, right? And here's China. And China definitely wanted to make sure Korea did things in its favor.
They still do. Like North Korea is like the last.
Heck yeah.
You know.
Here's the grandfather of the current dictator.
He looks so similar. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this
you could have told me that's like a black and white photo of the current one, and I would have believed you.
Yeah, the current one's a little chunkier though, I think.
Yeah.
So what did the Allies do? Because remember, the Allies, I mean China, the USSR, and the United States. What did we do with Korea? Because China wanted to be influential in one area, and the United States said, heck, we don't want to give up the whole area. So in 1945, the Allies split Korea and said, you know what, we'll deal with this issue later. We have so many things to deal with on the global stage. We're just going to make up this line at the 38th parallel, and we'll deal with it later. So the US influenced South. Its capital was in Seoul, and Pyongyang, the capital in North Korea, was up here. However, Kim Il-sung wasn't the guy that wanted to be pushed around by either the United States or China. He was very much a nationalist and very much his own guy, a lot like his grandson is today, right? I think one of the number one foreign relations issues that China has is frickin' North Korea, right? It drives them crazy. So Kim Il-sung thinks he's going to get backing from China or the US, so he invades South Korea. Without Chinese thumbs up, the Chinese actually didn't want him to do anything, right? They're still just trying to get their young act together. So what Kim Il-sung is doing is something that many leaders of these emerging nations are doing throughout the world. He's playing the Cold War powers off of each other, right? In order for what he thinks is his own betterment. So he's trying to unite North and South Korea. So in June 1950, he invades, right? He and his soldiers invade South Korea, catch South Korea completely off guard, right?
Oh.
Look at June, July, August, September. Within less than 3 months, North Korean soldiers control all this area right here.
So okay, earlier when you were talking about this, you said that the split between North and South Korea was an invention. It was a compromise by China and America.
Yep.
So,
by the way, without ever asking Koreans what they thought.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going with it. So that means essentially that America wasn't so much defending South Korea, which is sort of the impression I had gotten from the world, as preventing a unified Korea. And, today North Korea is a bad place to live, so we think of it as a good thing, but that's not necessarily how it was at the time.
Yeah, because how did North Korea become the industrial powerhouse and giant? Because the United States invested a lot of money in there, became its economic ally in order to have an ally, and also in order to stick it to North Korea. And it's been successful up till now. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the bread that South Koreans were offered, especially after the Korean War.
Gotcha.
So it was never a war. I'm sorry, it was a police action. Congress never declared war on North Korea because that would mean like declaring war on China, and that could get real ugly real soon. So because both USSR and the US had nukes, we didn't want the USSR to get involved at all. So the United Nations and the US called it a police action. So even though the North Koreans moved pretty rapidly into the south, about by November, September, October, November, this happened very quickly, right? Within 2 months after that, South Korean and US forces pushed north and pushed the Korean soldiers darn near to the Chinese border, right? US troops invade, and I'm sure now we're talking about many of our family members fought in this war. I have an uncle who was in the Korean War. So US troops invade, push North Korean soldiers back. This is a powerful image because it just shows like the young men we send to war, right? This young man looks early 20s. These guys look younger than that. I could be wrong, but just the youth of war always strikes me. So because we're looking at this time in the Korean War, China is very nervous about the United States controlling all of Korea. Very nervous, and they're feeling quite bold. So even though China couldn't face up to us technologically, China threw a lot of troops at the Korean War. 500,000 Chinese soldiers invade. They push US troops and their allies back to the original, right, 38th parallel, right?
Mhm.
So basically, at the end of this Korean War, the border stays the same at the cost of 2.5 million dead Koreans, right? 35,000 US, right? And 500,000 dead.
45 million dead, 2.5 million dead Korean civilians,
Yeah.
none of which were involved in the actual thing being
Yeah,
conflicted at all.
Yeah, and they're stuck between, right, this Cold
Yeah.
War fight.
That
And
just makes me really sad.
it is. So the victims in most of this Cold War proxy wars were everyday civilians, right? In which the United States and the Soviet Union and China are trying to fight over spheres of influence, big time. Yeah. The Cold War also manifested itself in culture wars. Whether you look at various Olympic games played every 4 years, you would have, right, the Soviet team against the American team, and who would get more medals was always like a big, big deal. Captain America, I think you remember him from last time. Did we mention Captain America in the World War II lecture? I think we did.
I'm not sure. I think I missed the lecture, but
yeah, it's okay. In 1941, Captain America burst on the scene. This is their first comic, right? And Joey, who's Captain America given a right hook to in World 1941?
Hitler, hell yeah.
Hitler, right? So Captain America's kicking some German butt in 1941. But during the Cold War, now he's smashing commies, right? So here's this bald, ugly, creepy looking commie guy, and here's the Soviet Union green monster trying to zap Captain America. So the US quickly went from fighting against not Germans to fighting against communists, even culturally. Here's another piece of Cold War propaganda showing Americans, this is America under communism. And communists are deemed as these guys wearing all the same ugly gray drab outfits, coming and burning down everything we love and cherish in the United States. The Soviet Union had the same thing. Right here is a Soviet propaganda showing a proud Soviet worker, right, not rejecting Uncle Sam's offer of food and bread, and look at, and armaments, which is hidden inside the papers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Soviet propaganda saying, we don't need your help, Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam here is not looking that heroic. He looks like a grumpy old man. What's interesting to me, and I forgot to upload these on the canvas, but there were also cultural wars within music. For example, the Soviet Union would send their orchestras or their ballets to New York City, to Paris, throughout the Western world, just to demonstrate to the world how, oh my gosh, they play classical music wonderful. Their ballet is wonderful, and it was wonderful, okay?
Ballet, I'm to this day, Russian ballet is like a really distinctive style, because like we have American ballet and French style ballet and a bunch of others that are all like relatively similar, and then Russian ballet is really different.
Oh, that's cool, man. Your knowledge is deeper than mine. Is it different in the sense that one of the things, so when you imagine a classical music concert, how's everybody seated? How are they dressed? Who are they following? Joey, I have to pick on you.
I'm not entirely sure. Sorry, I don't know. I'm not. I don't know a ton about ballet. When you're talking about,
I'm talking about classical music. Imagine a symphony, right? What's the scene on the stage of a symphony?
when I saw the San Francisco Symphony a couple times growing up, and generally it's like you're kind of in the seats that the audience is in are kind of raised, and they're in a circle, and you can look down into what is a more or less a pit, and the symphony's like in
Yeah,
there,
what
and
do
they're
all
all
the musicians look like? Oh, how are they all dressed and who are they taking orders from?
well, there's a conductor, obviously, yeah, or,
Mhm.
a director or whatnot, and
Yeah.
they're generally all in like suits, or like the woman could wear like black dresses, things like that.
Yeah. And this is what the Soviet Union want to like metaphorically get across. The Soviet Union is a great nation. We all are equal. Look at, we all wear the same outfit, but we all kick butt in our jobs, whether it's the violinist, the cellist, or whomever. And we all follow one directive, which is the conductor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an
So they
interesting
wanted to
metaphor.
demonstrate their cultural superiority through teamwork and through egalitarianism, right? That was their big message. And geez, their classical music stuff rocks.
Do you know any because there are a lot of famous Russian composers, and I don't know exactly the time periods. Do you like know off the top of your head any that were writing in this time?
Right now, they're, you know what? Let's talk about that afterwards.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just don't want to. No, we'll do that in our discussions afterwards.
Yeah.
So this is how the Soviet Union tried to influence emerging, developing third world countries, right? Send your ballet there. Or even tried to convince New Yorkers how cool the USSR was. So for example, the British colony of Ghana, right here, was fighting for and eventually will win its independence from Britain. So what do the US and the Soviet Union try to do? They try to woo Ghana to be allies with them, with us. So if the Soviet Union is going to send classical music, who is the United States going to send? Who are like the coolest folks in the United States, and what kind of music are they playing at this time, the 50s?
Oh, it's rock, and the invention of rock.
Close. Yep, you're very, very close. Jazz, Louis Armstrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to upload this great clip about Louis Armstrong going to Ghana. He's bringing his band with him, and his wife is with him, and they're just jamming in Ghana. And a lot of these local Ghanese people, Ghanese, oh my gosh, I don't know what you call people from Ghana. I should.
Ghanaian? Is that what it is?
Ghanaian,
I might be wrong.
probably.
Yeah.
Sounds good. These local people from Ghana are just loving it, right? And of course, it's a State Department funded propaganda trip, but oh my gosh, the clip is so good. And the message was the United States saying, hey, look how cool we are and look how diverse we are, right? His band had a white guy, a couple African-American guys, right? And his wife was there. So when Ghana won its independence, it became pro-US. Did Louis Armstrong help? I'm sure it wasn't the only reason the leadership in Ghana became pro-US, but I'm sure it didn't hurt. For example, Egypt right here, it's fighting for its independence from England. It should be, anyway, it's a complicated story, but England had a big influence over Egypt, and the Soviet Union was trying to bring Egypt into its sphere of influence. So who do we send to Egypt? Our secret weapon. The State Department called Louis Armstrong our secret weapon, and here he is jamming a tune in an Egyptian town somewhere. And Armstrong and his band went throughout, right? Throughout the State Department funded Cold War tour to show the world how cool we were. Here they are in 1965 in East Germany, right? Here they are. In fact, the US composer Leonard Bernstein on his 1959 trip to Moscow said, music costs so much less and produces so much better result than any propaganda or weaponry. There are no warmer feelings than those engendered by music. So when Leonard Bernstein went to the Soviet Union, he was well received, right? If you could read Russian, this is a very pro-Bernstein piece on his trip there. However, Louis Armstrong was not just the State Department's like Uncle Tom, right? Shucking and jiving whenever the State Department wanted to. In 1957, as you'll remember, there was the Little Rock 9 students who were being harassed because they were trying to desegregate the Little Rock High School. You saw that in a previous section. So in a way to show his displeasure for that, Armstrong canceled his trip to Moscow to protest these racist actions in Little Rock, Arkansas. He said, quote, "The way they are treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell. It's getting so bad a colored man hasn't got any country." And this speaks to the fact that well, on one hand, the US has a history of institutional racism, right? We also present ourselves as the beacon of freedom and democracy, right? It's the great irony of the United States, right? On one hand, our story is that we are a diverse nation that offers equality for all. On the other hand, our story is a history of violent racism, right? And here's Superman, this guy from a different planet, right? This alien guy telling Americans, hey, don't be racist. Right, this is like 1956. And remember, boys and girls, your school, like our country, is made up of Americans of many different races, religions, and national origins. So if you hear anybody talk against a schoolmate or anyone else because of his religion, race, national origin, don't wait. Tell him that that kind of talk is un-American. Okay. All right. Hey, y'all, Zoom me if you have any questions about this. I'm going to stop recording.